Now, Israel has long complained to the international community, especially European nations, that some of the aid they provide to the Palestinian Authority helps fund incitement against Israel and the Jews. One group that has focused on incitement in the Palestinian educational system is Impact SE. And thanks to their research, the government of Norway has announced it will withhold half of this year's funding to the PA's education system until it stops using textbooks that promote hate and violence. I would just want to give one example, and this is from a mathematics textbook in which calculus is taught by counting the number of martyrs in Palestinian uprising. Calculus. A photograph of a funeral is placed next to the question. The number of martyrs of the First Intifada is 2,026 martyrs, and the number of martyrs of the Aqsa Intifada is 5,050. The number of martyrs in the two Intifadas is fill-in-the-blank martyrs. Well, joining us now in the studio is Marcus Sheff. He is the CEO of Impact SE. Thanks for joining us, Marcus.
Thank you,
so we saw one, I think, almost unbelievable, where it's in mathematics, but there are other examples, maybe even more direct to the point. We're going to bring up on the screen now one of them. Explain to us, for example, what this is.
Well, this is teaching physics, teaching Newton's second law, as it happens, by using a slingshot. But what is the subtext? The subtext is very clear. It is saying to young Palestinian children, grade 7, go out and put yourself in danger, sacrifice yourself. This is really the theme of this new, and we can still call it new, Palestinian curriculum. It was rewritten in 2016, 17, 18, and changes were made in two directions. First of all ideas of peace were taken out.
Right.
There were, ideas of negotiations which had taken place between the Palestinians and Israel, peace treaties between Israel and Egypt, Israel and Jordan. All of that was gone. One cursory mention of the Oslo Accords with a doctored letter of Yasser Arafat, not mentioning the cooperation between Israel and the Palestinians in that letter. And what was put in was really extreme violence, extreme ideas of jihad, of martyrdom, of a one state.
Right. Let's take a look at just a geometry lesson, which is a sort of map of the Palestinian state. And there you could see, as you say, no room for compromise in that map.
Absolutely not. There is no Israel there. In fact, there's no Israel in the dozens of maps that you see across this curriculum. The cities inside of Israel are labeled Palestinian cities, but absolutely every map looks like that. One state, river to the sea. And the slingshot that you had before and the counting the martyrs, what that says is the way to get that state, the way to gain that is through violence, is through jihad, is through ribat, which is essentially terrorism, and continue doing that, and we will have this one state, Palestine.
Right. Now, talk to us a bit about the role of, especially the international community, and especially of Europe, in funding some of this material, making some of it possible.
Well, the Europeans essentially fund the Palestinian Ministry of Education because they're paying the teachers, they're paying the people who write the textbooks, who examine on the textbooks, who, ultimately are responsible for the textbooks. They are absolutely the people at the center of this. And, they don't want this. We spend a lot of time in Europe speaking to politicians, speaking to governments, to parliamentarians. Firstly, they're shocked by the material. But secondly, they are very clear about what should be in these books. They're very clear that Palestinian national identity shouldn't be brought to this idea of sacrifice, violence, and hate and incitement, and they are no longer supportive of this.
Well, let's talk about one country in particular, Norway. And of course, when you think of Norway, you automatically think of the Oslo Accords because they played such a major role in really just creating what is today the peace process.
Yeah, absolutely. But Norway is also well known as being both leaders in education and leaders in foreign aid. Now, that brings them to leadership in relation to the Europeans and the Palestinian Ministry of Education. They, if you like, lead the charge in the work that is done between Europe and the PA in relation to education. And so the fact that they are leading in saying we are halting this funding until these textbooks are changed is incredibly significant. You know, this isn't just another country, a country in Scandinavia or a country that was involved in the Oslo Accords. It is a key nation which is involved on a day-to-day basis with the Palestinians and the Ministry of Education, saying very clearly, enough, we don't want this anymore.
Well, which begs the question about the Palestinian reaction to these kind of moves. What are we hearing, and even your own interface, if there is, with the Palestinians on this?
Well, the reaction is always the same. In English, there are excuses. It is only a pilot curriculum, or we are making changes. In Arabic, and of course we follow the Arabic utterances very clearly, it's completely different. It is resistance. We're not going to change this. We're going to continue with this, and do not mess. And even yesterday, a leading Fatah member of the Palestinian parliament essentially said the Norwegians have absolutely no right to do this. They are interfering in our educational system. Now, that might or might not be a valid point. Certainly not a valid point, though, when the Norwegians are paying for it.
But beyond the rhetoric, is there any change? I mean, do you see any changes in the school textbooks without perhaps coming out and openly admitting that they're making this change?
So far, no. But the big question is what will happen in September of 2020. They rewrite the curriculum every year. There is a new set of textbooks every year. We're going to see in September. We pushed the European Union, actually Mogherini, who, as you know, was the High Commissioner for Foreign Affairs, right, to sponsor a review of the Palestinian curriculum. That should be ready by now. We're going to see what is in that. And, theoretically, that should be the moment where the European Union says, we're joining Norway. We did help in legislation that went through the European Union 2 weeks ago, which said we condemn this curriculum. They stopped short of saying they're going to freeze funds. It wasn't that kind of committee. It was a budgetary control committee, but there will be a budgetary committee in November meeting. Let's see what happens between September and November. If there is no change in the curriculum, we expect the European Union, which is the single biggest payer to the Ministry of Education, we expect them to say enough as well.
Well, hopefully that will be the case, and we'll talk about that later in this year. Marcus Sheff, CEO of Impact SE, thank you for joining us on The Rundown.